Good evening and welcome to the Granada Forum. Tonight we have a very special program for you. You'll be meeting Linda Wiegand and hearing the incredible story of one courageous mother's quest to save her children, John and Ben. She'll present a well-documented and heartbreaking case history of alleged sexual abuse, visited upon her sons by a former husband. Their custody battle for the boys scans several states, even coming to national attention. Evidence of a large sex slave or pedophile ring has surfaced, and the extent to which particularly the Hartford, Connecticut judicial system has gone to cover up their incompetence and corruption in dealing with the case and related problems is nothing short of mind-boggling. Joining Linda in her presentation will be retired Agent Ted Gunderson, former head of the special agent in charge, former head of the FBI here in Los Angeles. He has been most supportive of Linda, as have others been, in her struggle to regain custody. They are acting as advocates. We should also like to mention and acknowledge the efforts of former presidential candidate and highly decorated war hero, Lieutenant Colonel James Bogue Wright. He made tremendous effort on Linda's behalf, and he should be mentioned and honored. This is sure to be a most enlightening presentation. Now please join me in a nice warm welcome for our guest speakers. Linda, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just want to put down, I have laryngitis tonight, so just be patient with me. If you can't hear me, please let me know. These are my boys behind me, John and Ben. I already started crying before I got here, so forgive me if I cry. I have tissue, too, and you might need it, too, after you hear what's been happening with John and Ben. Ben is a little blonde boy. Ben is now 8 years old, and John is 11. The last time I saw my children was on July 3rd, 1996, when I dropped them off at summer camp. After I took them to the dentist, they actually were on a stage in a presentation at camp, and I shook their baseball caps, and I said, "I love you. I'll see you at 5 o'clock. At about 2:30 in the afternoon, I had gone home to take a shower. The FBI came through my door. I've never seen my children again. The FBI took my children and gave them back to the man that they say is sodomizing them, continue to say is sodomizing them, and we cannot get my children out of his hands. And I'm here to ask you tonight, I'm going to tell you my story. It's a true story. It's absolutely unbelievable that people can be tortured in America like what has happened to me and my children. Everything I will say is documented and is true. It's amazing that we're still alive and speaking here tonight, but there's probably a bigger reason. Those are John and Ben's little kittens, Milo and Chrissy, and I'll tell you what happened to those kittens also. Before I start with the story, what I wanted to do is show you just 4 pictures, and if anybody has children or has a squeamish stomach about sexual abuse, I want to just show you 4 slides that are police documents and are pictures that the kids drew to give you an example, a visual example of how bad the sexual abuse is. This isn't about daddy touched my knee. This is not about somebody looked at me the wrong way. This is about someone is sodomizing me with a knife at my throat. This is about someone is forcing a child to have oral sex with him and masturbating onto a child's face. This is serious sexual abuse. This is a picture that Ben drew for the police in Vermont. Actually, John drew this one. This is Ben, and you can pretty much, it speaks for itself. Can you move it up higher? Sure I can. And if you notice in all the sexual abuse pictures, the abuser has a smile. And in some of the pictures I'll show you now, the children have either no mouth or an unhappy face. And there's one picture I don't have with me tonight, is one of the boys being sodomized, and in the far corner of the picture is a little tiny baby head with like a cartoon bubble for words, with a cry, with mommy, and tears coming out of his eyes. This is a picture that John drew. Tom is putting his penis in my butt, and if you notice, on the top is a man with a happy face and an erect penis, and a little boy with the arrows of the penis into his anus and an unhappy face. This is another picture John drew. John, with an arrow. John's watching his brother be sodomized. The arrow from the word John goes to another little boy with no mouth. That means they were forced to be silent. And later on, you'll find out that they were threatened to be killed for disclosing. It says, I saw Tom put his penis in Ben's butt. My children have testified in Connecticut, in Vermont, in front of the Attorney General, State's Attorney, Social Services, Police, that they are being sexually abused by this man, and yet they remain there today. This is a picture that John drew for the police. At the top, it's labeled John and Tom. Pretty much speaks for itself. This is one of the last pictures we have of the boys. This was taken in Las Vegas, Nevada. This was Valentine's Day. We do have a few more pictures that were taken afterward, but when the FBI ransacked my house, when they came in July 3rd, I lost a lot of pictures and a lot of film that I had, and it's the second time I lost my house. And then what I want to do is just to show you the level that this has reached. Before I start my story, my narrative, this is a letter that Ted Gunderson wrote and distributed to all of the senators and all the congressmen in Connecticut last week, and my boys are still in the house with Tom Wilkinson. Dear Senators and Representatives, I have been investigating the John and Ben Wiegand case over the past several months. This is the worst case of child sexual abuse I have ever seen in my 47 years of investigative work. I have attached a copy of my affidavit dealing with each document I have reviewed. John and Ben are in grave danger. Connecticut state officials have failed to act to protect them. It is a travesty of justice to allow these boys to remain in the control of a pedophile. Even if you question the sexual abuse acts these boys have testified about and the various officials have substantiated, you cannot deny that the graphic nature of these statements and these drawings raises the question of why have these boys not been put into protective custody while your own state's attorney, Jim Thomas, has an open and pending criminal investigation with 25 people against Wilkinson for the sexual abuse of the same children. You cannot ignore the fact that 4 state court judges have violated the law and have awarded custody of my son, John, who was not Wilkinson's child, and Wilkinson did not adopt him, to the man he said sexually abused him. You must intervene. 2 little boys' lives are at stake. I urge you to act before the state's liability increases with the possible fatality of these 2 boys. Thank you sincerely, Ted Gunderson, FBI Senior Special Agent in Charge, retired. John was born right after I was married briefly after college for about 10 months, and my marriage was annulled. I had full custody of John, and his dad moved to Chicago, and he did not have any interaction with his life. But Wilkinson was not John's father and did not adopt him. I bought a house in 1987. I was a businesswoman. I was making $100,000 a year. I bought a colonial house with 3 bedrooms and a big old attic. I hired a construction company to put 2 more bedrooms into the attic. Wilkinson was the owner of the construction company. He worked on my house for about 6 months. I saw him every day when I came home from work. I fed him dinner, fed his crew dinner, and got to know them. He was a regular person, looked regular, sounded regular, He's one of the most intelligent men I've ever met. Excuse me. We started being involved personally. I had been in 1989. Tom and I were married, and he lived with us. Things didn't quite seem right, but nothing that you could put your finger on. Not quite put your finger on. One day I walked into John's room in the spring of 1989, and he had a big old teddy bear on his bed, and we called her Lilac. She was the color purple. John was making furious love to his teddy bear Lilac. Violent, furious love to his teddy bear. I stood in the doorway. I've been babysitting since I've been 10 years old. I have never seen a child act like that. I never suspected Wilkinson, and I regret that to this day. I took John to a child's hospital in Connecticut. I asked to see a child psychiatrist. He interviewed my child, who was 3.5 at the time. Children at 3.5 really don't talk very much. And now I know that he was threatened to be killed if he ever disclosed abuse. And so the case was closed. There was no evidence of sexual abuse. There was nothing that John said, and we continued living with Wilkinson. Our little boy, Ben, was born with thrush. And it's just a normal, everyday, just a bacteria infection that some children get when they're born. But Ben's thrush kept spreading from his genitals to his mouth, from his genitals to his mouth. And I spent months going to the doctor with all kinds of medicines, and then Wilkinson got thrush in his mouth. I never put it all together until many years later. We had to resort to using Jensen Violet, which turns the baby's mouth and genitals completely dark purple. And I remember Ben was baptized on Easter Sunday in 1989, and he was completely purple. His whole mouth, his lips, his whole genital area was purple from the Jensen Violet. I'll never forget that day. And it didn't occur to me, why did Wilkinson have thrush in his mouth? The doctors told me later on that they believe that Ben has been sexually abused since birth, and that what they believe is that Wilkinson was having oral sex with my baby boy, and that's how the thrush was spread. We continued living together. I fell and hurt my back. We were married, and I herniated a disc in my back, and I was in bed flat out for about a year. I could get up and I could eat dinner, but I was in very much pain. And Wilkinson took care of the children for me. He put them to bed every night. I stayed in my bedroom, and I did not know what was going on in the children's room late at night when I was sleeping. The boys said almost every night he would walk into their room after I was asleep, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He would decide which child he was going to sodomize first. John said he liked to sodomize Ben first, most of the time, and then he'd take a break for 45 minutes and sodomize John. One night we were watching a CNN special, John and I, on homeless children in New York City. And they lived in the sewers during the day, and they would come out at night and forage for food. And John said to me, "Mommy, can we help those children?" Now this is a little boy who's being sodomized, trying to help other children. I said, "John, I can't help the kids in New York. It's too far." And we started a charity called Gifts of Love, truly a gift of love. It was founded through John's idea of helping other children. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the charity work, just so you understand who I am, and then what has been done to annihilate me and my children. We started a charity. We helped 1,200 people at least a month. We matched up fortunate families with less fortunate families, people who are just like yourselves, who did not want to go to food pantries and did not want to go and wait at soup kitchens and had houses and lost their jobs When people found out I was helping other people, I would wake up every morning, it was a miracle. All the way up my driveway up a hill was food and toys and clothes and money. I mean, people all night long would be dropping things off. It was miraculous what happened with this charity. We wound up turning my whole basement of this house into a mini supermarket. We had shelves, and we would have manufacturers like Revlon and milk companies and meat companies, with the point where my whole house, it was amazing what happened. People would come at midnight because they were too embarrassed. They would be driving in a Jaguar and they couldn't feed themselves, and they would come to my door at midnight because their children were starving. And it got to the point where I'd leave my basement hatch open so these families could go down and go shopping and feed their families at night. One night I went over to deliver food to a family I heard was in terrible shape. And I got to their door and I had all kinds of things for them. It was Christmas. They were sitting on their dining room floor in probably a $400,000 house. They had sold their furniture to try and eat. The father was feeding his family a squirrel because they were too proud to ask for help. And it was just a miracle that we were able to give them an outlet to help themselves and get back on their feet. And that's what Gifts of Love is about. And that's what my children started. My children used to give their allowance to help these people. My children would volunteer every weekend. And I'll tell you, if I was POW, which I consider my children to be today, my boys would be standing here to help their mom get out of trouble. And I will do everything I can, including give my life if necessary, to save my children. Gifts of Love received national recognition. Family Circle awarded me Woman of the Year, Reader's Digest. The irony of it is that my name is on a bronze plaque in Connecticut Town Hall in Simsbury as Hometown Hero. I was told last week that my picture hangs at the Capitol, right outside the governor's office, for my charity work in Connecticut. And yet they have done everything to annihilate my life, to keep me quiet, to keep two boys with a pedophile. And the question is, what is going on in Hartford, Connecticut? I can tell you here tonight, there's also another mother that I know of whose child is also being held captive by a pedophile. This is going on all over the country. This is a much bigger issue. We are going to use John and Ben to free a lot of children who are being held illegally, immorally, by people who are sexually abusing them. I started to notice behaviors in my children that I found to be very, very bizarre. I walked in one day, John and Ben were having oral sex with my St. Bernard dog. I had absolutely no knowledge of child sexual abuse. All I knew is I've been babysitting a really long time and I've never seen these behaviors. And people said to me, well, why don't you spank them? Why don't you, get them to behave? But down deep in my heart, in my gut, I knew this was something else, but I didn't know what it was. My children would not have bowel movements for maybe 2 weeks at a time. And when they would, the bowel movements would be the size of their arms. I would look at their, you try and help them after they go to the bathroom, there'd be big red rings around their anuses. I thought, how odd, I've never seen that before. I went to 5 or 6 pediatricians in the area asking for help. I did not know it was sexual abuse. The doctors, who we now believe may be part of a pedophile ring, would tell me, put the children on prunes, give them Colace, a stool softener, put them to bed earlier, change their diet. All of the things were going circular and ignoring child sexual abuse. My children being sodomized every night, and I'm giving them prunes. I wish I knew today what I knew then. And so that's my job, is to educate everybody what to look for, because I never expected child sexual abuse to be in my life. Finally, I said to myself, these children are having such odd behaviors. We would go to the supermarket. I remember clearly one day, I was walking down the frozen food section going to get some corn. Ben pulled down his pants and started masturbating in front of a woman coming around the corner in the frozen food section. The woman just about died. You know, she stopped dead still in the aisle, and I knew something was seriously wrong with my children. I didn't know what. So I thought it was my charity work. I thought I was just too involved in the community. I wasn't giving my children enough time. Even though I took them everywhere with me, I included them in everything, I thought it had to be me. So I said to Tom Wilkinson, we're going to go up and stay by my family was in Vermont. We're going to move up there for about 6 months. I'm going to stop with all the charity work. I was chairman of the board at this time of the charity. I was home on medical leave from my job because I hurt my back, and we're just going to go play in the snow, you know, enjoy Vermont, see my family. Well, it served two purposes. The kids felt safe. The kids were no longer living with Wilkinson. Although he did come up and visit them on weekends, would encourage me to go have dinner with my mother, my sister. He would rape them when I was out at dinner, put them to bed with a knife at their throat, tell them that he would kill them, kill me, kill their dog if they ever disclosed. What happened, though, was somehow Ben, my little one, must have felt safe enough one day at school. He was having peanut butter and jelly with 8 little kids and his teacher. And I remember clearly the day I was at home, and I was vacuuming the living room, and I got a call from his teacher. She said, stop whatever you are doing. Come down to the school. I think there's a big problem. I remember I was in sweatpants. I didn't know what to do. I just left the house right there. I stopped everything. I thought he fell and had stitches. I didn't, you know, I thought it was an emergency, something like that. And then I looked, and Ben was fine. And I couldn't understand why they called me down there. She said, we were sitting around having peanut butter and jelly, and Ben just casually turned to me and said, do you know that my dad has XEX with me? And I said, oh boy. I said, well, do you think that is what he, you know, sex, or is that something that he's just saying? I didn't know. She said, well, we're not sure either, but because we have to have this investigated, we want you to take him to your pediatrician and ask him what he thinks. I went right away to the pediatrician. The kids were going wild. My little boy, it was like something in their brains were unleashed. And right at the pediatrician, we have a letter from the doctor. And, you know, my little boy was saying, Mommy, I want to hump you. I'm going to suck your vagina. It was like he just unleashed everything all at one day. And he started drawing pictures for his doctor, all kinds of things. My older boy started to disclose also when he heard that Ben was disclosing. Ben took my hand, and he spit on the back of my hand. And I said, this was after he had taken a whole tube of toothpaste and put it all over the St. Bernard. I said, Ben, why did you do that for? He said, Mommy, that's what it feels like when Daddy pees on my face. It makes me swallow it down in my belly. And I said, Ben, what color is the pee? And he said, Mommy, it's white. And I knew from that day forward that sexual abuse had entered our lives, that my children were telling the truth. I need no experts. I don't need anybody to tell me that my children made this up, that this is false allegations, that my children have lost their minds. I know 100% that these children were sexually abused, just from that one day alone. Never mind the hundreds and thousands of documents and professionals that have come forward to say that my children are being sexually abused. Vermont arrested Wilkinson and charged him with sodomy and oral sex with my younger son, Ben. They never got a chance to process the arrest warrant for his sodomy and oral sex with John. The same week, he was arrested and let out on bail. He went to Connecticut, where my house was, and basically bought a judge. He applied for custody of these children. The older boy is not his. The state attorney in Vermont, we have the letter, asked the judge in Connecticut to not even consider custody when this man is being prosecuted for sexual abuse of these children. The judge said no, he would not listen to the state's attorney, and he would go forward with a custody change and evaluation in Connecticut. Now I have 2 little boys who are witnesses in a criminal prosecution, and a judge in Connecticut telling me that I need to turn over my children to a pedophile. What would you do? Well, that judge needs to go to jail. I'll tell you that. He's still free today, but we're going to make sure Judge Barral goes to jail. He's done this to hundreds of children over about 30 years, and this is where it's going to stop. And this is where you need to get involved, because through this case, we're going to set the example in the country that we're not going to tolerate corrupt judges, we're not going to tolerate corruption, and we're not going to tolerate pedophilia. Absolutely not. I took my children on vacation in the middle of this Vermont, Connecticut. I was basically dying. I was so weak. I remember I collapsed on the bathroom floor one day because in the morning I'd be in Vermont, my children as witnesses in a criminal trial. In the afternoon, 5 hours away, I had to be at a Connecticut hearing for custody. I took my kids on a fishing trip, April of '93, and we got giardia, which is like a water parasite, you know, from a fishing trip when you go camping. I didn't know I had giardia, and I was so weak and so thin, I just collapsed one day. And I said, boy, I better go and take a few weeks off because I'm not going to make it. And the judge in Connecticut wouldn't stop. The criminal prosecution was going forward, and my kids were breaking down. So we went to Texas for 3 weeks to stay with a college friend of mine so she could help me with the children, I could just relax, and I could recover and get better. While I went to Texas, Wilkinson's really clever, he motioned to the Vermont prosecutor excuse me, to close the criminal charges against him while the witnesses were gone. He said that we had left, there were no witnesses to testify against him, and if they didn't close the case, he was going to sue them. He sued them anyway. He sued everybody. But they closed the case temporarily without prejudice until we returned. We've never been able to return to Vermont. When I got back from vacation, Judge Barral ordered that I have to live in Connecticut or he would take away my son Ben. He gave me 3 days to move from Vermont to Connecticut. That was find a house, because I had rented out my house, you know, my big house, and I was living in the condo in Vermont. He gave me 3 days to relocate from Vermont, find somewhere to live, and bring my kids to Connecticut. During those 3 days, my son Ben tried to commit suicide, and my son John tried to kill someone over pizza when this man, who he's never met before, asked him how his father was, how Tom was. John grabbed a knife from the table, dived under the table, and went to stab the man in his genitals. That's how upset my children were that we had to move back to Connecticut. I took them to a hospital in Vermont. We were there for the 3 days packing. And the Vermont hospital said they were in imminent danger of a psychotic breakdown and needed to be hospitalized. They called all the hospitals in Vermont and Connecticut, and the only opening they had for an emergency was in a Harvard-affiliated hospital in Massachusetts. And they told me to take the children to Massachusetts right then and there. They admitted my children to the hospital, and Wilkinson and his sister got a temporary custody order from the judge in Connecticut to go and take my children out of the hospital. The doctor, however, realized what was going on and called me, and I was at a hotel nearby, and I would spend the day with the kids and go home to the hotel at night. He called me, thank God for the doctor. He said, Linda, I want you to go immediately to a judge in Boston. I want you to bring the sexual abuse evidence from Vermont and I want you to get a restraining order immediately. While I was in court telling the judge what had gone on with my children, Wilkinson and his sister had filed removal papers to take my children out of the hospital in Boston into their custody from Baral's order. It took too long from the judge finally issued the order about 2 o'clock, and I faxed it into the hospital to stop them. It was a little bit too late, but they still didn't get the kids at that point because the doctor committed my children to the hospital in order to thwart them from getting the kids. He said he would only release the kids to my custody, not to the people who committed sexual abuse. So thank God for that doctor. But it's been a battle for 5 years to keep my children safe when this should never have happened. Not one day this should have happened. I took the kids back to Connecticut after they were released. They were released on September 2nd of 1993. I took them back to Connecticut. We were ordered to go through a custody evaluation in Connecticut with the judge's best friend, Ken Robson, who is another person that we intend on federally prosecuting and putting in jail. Ken Robson is what I call a faux doctor, F-A-U-X. He makes up his own rules. He follows 2 experts in the country, Ralph Underwager and Richard Gardner. And they made up this scale of how to evaluate child sexual abuse. They're basically paid witnesses for the abusers to discount any child sexual abuse, no matter how bad it is. They come in and say the kids were never abused. My kids tried to kill, my older son John tried to kill Wilkinson at the evaluation. That never got in the report. My kids testified for 40 hours about the sexual abuse that Wilkinson did to them and his sister. His sister forced my children to have oral sex with her. She now babysits for my children 3 days a week. Dr. Robson issued a report, January of 1994. It's about 162 pages, details all the sexual abuse that the kids, all the allegations, and concludes at the end that the kids were not sexually abused, that they had what's called magical thinking. They made it up. And I remember I went to my lawyer's office to pick up a copy of the report, and I had seen and heard everything my children said to the doctor. And I felt so great going to pick up this report because I knew the kids had disclosed everything. And I thought, for sure, my kids are safe now. And I remember I had a Diet Coke and I sat in the conference room. I opened up the report and I saw there were statements of sexual abuse, included. I flipped to the end to see what the conclusion was. And it said the kids should begin immediate unsupervised visitation with Wilkinson for weekends, and then he should have joint custody, unsupervised, and that sexual abuse was magical thinking. I said, oh no, no. Something's really wrong here. I didn't know quite what it was. Now I know exactly what's going on in Connecticut, but I just knew something was really wrong. So as Ted will tell you, the beginning of my end, or my change in my life, I put an ad in the paper. I started a group called Citizens Against Judicial Abuse, and I asked for anyone who had any unfair custody finding involving child sexual abuse in Hartford County, Connecticut, to contact me. My post office box, my phone number. I paid $1,000 a week. I ran the ad 3 weeks before they took my house, everything I've ever owned, had a secret hearing to take custody of my children away from me. They took my cars. Even the car I was driving was on paper confiscated. A state judge, family court judge, took my federal post office box mail, same post office box that over 100 people, to the point where it was confiscated, had responded that they were victims of the same group of corrupt people. I was away with the kids when this happened. They had to have medical attention time and time again. I just happened to be out of state. It was February 14th, 1994. A friend of mine called me up and said that there's a secret hearing going on in the court, in the family court. The judge has everybody in the chambers, told a court transcriber to leave the room, and that my ex-husband's lawyer, Lou Kiefer, and the children's attorney, who was Judge Baral's old clerk, were back in the judge's chambers, and then there were orders issued that were sealed. I called my attorney. I said, "What's going on today?" He said, "Linda, never in my whole career," now the man's probably about 60 years old, "I've never heard of orders being sealed from the attorney and the client." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, until I know what they are, I'm not going home. The kids and I are not going anywhere near that courtroom." And he said, "Well, you have to come back. You have to go see what they are." I said, "Oh, no." I said, "You find out what those court orders are before I come back to Connecticut." Within 3 weeks of me not coming back and never being served with these orders, they were still sealed. My other friend called me up, the kid's karate teacher, and he said, "Lynn, I went over to check your house, water the plants, make sure all the doors were closed. Your house is completely empty." I said, "What do you mean my house is empty?" He said, "There's an empty cereal box on the kitchen floor. There's not a thing in the house. Their clothes, the furniture, pictures off the walls, the glasses, the dishes, everything completely cleaned out." I called the police. I said, what's happened? I think I've been robbed." They said, "Oh, no. The Hartford court issued an order that you'd abandon your property and everything in your house was to be seized because it's abandoned." I said, "Abandoned? I'm paying my mortgage, I'm paying my electric bill, I'm away for 3 weeks. I've never, ever recovered anything. We lost everything. The only thing we had was the clothes that we had on and an overnight bag." It gets a lot worse. What bothered me the most about everything we lost was I lost all my baby pictures. It's really funny. It's like the one thing you realize that really meant something wasn't my wedding china or my silver or anything. It was my baby pictures. And Tom Wilkinson used to play my piano from his house on my friends' answering machines just to let them know that he had all my stuff on my piano in his house. Today, my curtains hang in his house, my furniture is in his house, my children are in his house. My cars were seized, so I had to put my car, I was driving a Saab at the time, now I have no car at all. I put my car in storage because I was really afraid if they found the children and myself, what would they do to us? Put my car in storage and rented another car, and from March till about September, my children received treatment and sexual abuse treatment from an expert in the country. They were recovering. They recovered really, really well. Kids who are sexually abused don't laugh and don't kid around and don't do kid things. They're very, very serious, and they're very quiet. And my kids had recovered to the point where they were like regular little boys again and had friends and played Little League. But we couldn't find out what these sealed orders were. And after I lost my house, I heard that my mail was seized at the post office. My assets were seized. Everything was seized by this family court judge who didn't even have jurisdiction over my property. They seized my house, the actual building itself. I said, "I'm homeless. If I have to reestablish a home, why would I go back to Connecticut to subject myself to what I believe is illegal and inhumane acts?" I had to get an apartment. I had to keep the kids safe. And I didn't know what to do. I had heard about Mr. Gunderson before I knew him. And I went and found his book, How to Find Anybody in the United States, or he'll tell you the exact title. I did research for about a month. I read every single book on how to find somebody that exists probably in America, and I did the opposite. I went underground and went out to Nevada under an assumed name. We had a house and a car. We had a kitten and a puppy. And the kids had a real, regular life. They were happy with all kinds of friends. And we lived underground, and it was really hard. People knew me as Donna Maloney. And it's kind of funny because I was back in Las Vegas this weekend staying with my old neighbors who knew me as Donna. And the kids all call me Donna Linda now because they're not sure what to call me. And we lived in Nevada. We had a regular life. And I used to fly back and forth to Connecticut to go and see lawyers, to go and see organizations, to try and get help from anybody who could find out what to do about a corrupt court system, how to reverse these orders. I mean, I didn't just go underground and hope that nobody found us. I went underground because we were in fear of our lives, and then tried to get help. At one point, I don't really talk about this too much, I had tickets to Brazil. I was going to go to South America because they don't extradite on child sexual abuse cases like this. And the night before we were leaving, I remember I had spent $4,500 for 3 tickets, and I was packed and ready to go to Brazil. And I said, no, I'm not going to go because this is my country. This cannot be allowed to happen. And I have to keep working. I cannot work. If I walk away and go to Brazil, my children may be saved, but it never resolves that children are being compromised and sacrificed, that are sexually abused. And I'm not going to go to Brazil. And I made the decision to stay in this country and to fight for these children. I never knew that the FBI would come and find us. And believe me, I've had some days where I wish I was in Brazil and my kids were safe. But on the other side, if I wasn't here today, there might be hundreds of other children who were never saved because this issue never would come to light. So probably it was the right decision, but the sacrifice is great. The woman who helped us go underground, her name was Donna Maloney. She had given me her birth certificate. She was the mother of my children's best friends. There was a $100,000 reward for us on the internet. Our posters were at Walmart. We were hunted like animals. Anywhere I traveled, and I would leave the boys back in Nevada, I would travel solely just in case I wound up getting caught. The kid's karate teacher who found my house empty and found the cereal box wound up coming out to help me and took care of the children, lived with us underground so that I could be free to travel and ask for help to find anybody who would help us. On July 3rd, 1996, I was going in the shower after I dropped the boys off at summer camp, and there was a knock on the front door. Now, I've been living as Donna Maloney, and they said, Linda, open the door. I was going in the shower, the doors were all locked, and I knew there was a problem. I put a sundress on. I want you to just understand I had no underwear, no shoes, I didn't have my glasses on, and I'm pretty blind without them. I just put a sundress on, and I went and called my attorney, who at that time was John DeCamp of Nebraska. And I had heard him on a radio show in January of '96. He was talking about the Franklin cover-up. And I remember pulling off the highway to get to a payphone saying, I called in on the radio show and I said, boy, I'm in a situation, I called it anonymously, but there's a situation in Connecticut that sounds awfully familiar, like the Franklin cover-up. Have you ever heard of the case? He said, yes, I have. And I said, well, I'd like your number. And I flew out to Nebraska to see him, and he said he would take my case and represent us. And I figured he would be the best person to do the job because he had, worked on the Franklin cover-up. The FBI came through the door with a SWAT team, armed men, while I was on the phone to DeCamp. And I remember, I knew I was in bigger trouble when the person knocked on the front door and said, Linda, open the door. My first response was to run, go get the kids, run. I don't care who it is, but if they know Linda, I know I'm in trouble. Whether it's people from, pedophiles, people from Connecticut, I just knew trouble was coming. I went to go out the back door. I'm not the most athletic person, but believe me, under those circumstances, I could have hopped a 12-foot wall in a heartbeat. As I went out to go out the back door, I had a little German Shepherd puppy, and she ran out, and a hand with a black glove and a black sweater grabbed the puppy's collar and pulled her around the side of the house. I knew the house was surrounded. So I locked the back door, and that's when I called the camp. I was on the phone with the camp saying, there's somebody here saying open the door. They're saying they're FBI. I asked them for their badge numbers, their supervisor's number, so I could verify who they were. And as I was saying that, they came through the door. The deadbolt went flying all the way across the house. The door went flying. I was surrounded. I was on the floor, and I remember the fear response with that kind of terror. Your whole mouth dries solid, and your tongue solidifies. Your tongue doesn't move. And I remember my heart was going, and all I could think about was, oh my God, my children. And right before I called the camp, I called a girlfriend of mine who didn't know who we were, and I said to her, go to my kids' camp, pick up my children, bring them to your house, do not ask me any questions, someone will contact you later. By the time she got to the kids' camp, and I found the story out later, I just found this story out a few months ago. By the time she got there, she was pregnant and a little bit too slow. The FBI had surrounded my kids at summer camp, had isolated them in the school gym with armed men with walkie-talkies blocking all the doors. My kids were crying, where's my mom, where's my mom? They told them that your mom's been arrested. They took my children for 5 days to Child Haven, a home for homeless children. My boys were strip searched. They took the crosses away from them. They gave them uniforms for the homeless kids wear. They took the shoelaces out of their sneakers. These boys were 7 and 10 years old. I've never been able to talk to them since I dropped them off at summer camp and said I'd pick you up at 5 o'clock. Not once. The FBI took me out back. I wouldn't tell them where the kids were. They took me out back and put me against the wall, threatened me with life in prison if I didn't tell them where my boys were. And I said, you know what? No disrespect intended, but I haven't done what I've done so that the minute you threaten my life, tell you where my children are. I said, you can do anything you want to me. I will never tell you where my boys are. So you know what they did? They ransacked my entire house. Agents running up and down stairs, tearing apart my closets, my kitchen, my whole house. And I kept saying to them, you do not have a search warrant. Now this is with a mouth that's completely frozen. You do not have a search warrant. You do not have a search warrant. They said, we do not care. They never read me my rights. They put me in handcuffs, 117-degree pavement, no underwear, no glasses. Took me out like I was a criminal. Took me to the furthest FBI squad car in the neighborhood. They had my whole neighborhood surrounded. My neighbors were out in their front lawns crying, saying that they had the wrong person, that we didn't do anything wrong. And when they ransacked my house, they found a receipt for my children's summer camp. And that's how they knew where to find the boys. I begged the agent on the way down to the county jail. I've never been in jail before. I begged him to pull over, give me 1 hour, report me escaped, and I would take my children and I would disappear. He said he believes me, but he can't do it. We got down to the jail. While they were fingerprinting me and taking pictures, they had great pleasure in coming over to tell me that they found my children. The abuse that I have had to endure is nothing compared to the emotional pain in knowing what they're doing to my boys. They kept me for 2 weeks in the county jail. My mother flew out immediately from Connecticut, and she went to see my boys. She was given 15 minutes to see my children. She got there the day that Wilkinson arrived with a custody order from Connecticut to pick up my children. My mother was sitting there with a social service worker. She wore one of my sweaters, and I gave her my cross that I've had since I've been a baby. Because I had taken it off when I went in the shower, and I told her to put it on so the boys knew that I knew where they were. She said she was sitting there. Wilkinson came in the room, and John and Ben were there. And the social worker told John and Ben that they'd be going home with Wilkinson. They both backed up against a wall, slid down to the floor, and said they wanted to die or commit some crime to be in prison with their mom before they would go with Wilkinson. Wilkinson said to them, "You better stand up and you better be quiet. Or if you see that tree out there," he said, "I'm going to tie you to a tree with chicken wire and straighten you out when we get home for what you've done." This is on an affidavit my mother filed in court in front of a social service worker. The judge in Nevada refused to take emergency jurisdiction over my children and release them to Wilkinson with an armed escort so he could get on a plane with these boys. My children disappeared. Nobody knew where they were and where Wilkinson was. I spent 2 weeks in county jail, and then one night I had a call, to tell you what the county jail setting, it's not as bad as maximum security prison, which I've had the pleasure of spending over 4 months at this year. But the county jail, everybody wears the orange uniforms. They took me in. They had a gymnasium. They were overcrowded with one toilet in the middle of the gymnasium. 80 women told to strip naked together, all male guards, video cameras with all the male guards on all the floors and the male prisoners watching us. Strip searched, which includes bending over and spreading your privates. And then one by one let back into the prison and giving underwear and clothes. Going through like showers, like an Auschwitz, which my hair used to be long and now is completely ruined because of so many times I've had to stand naked while they pour Quell, lice killer. From your fingertips, you have to stand there like this while they pour Quell from your fingertips to your toes and stand there with all these people until they decide that the lice killers worked. I've never had lice in my life. After I spent 2 weeks there, I got a call one night about 9 o'clock. I was sitting, the other prisoners were pretty respectful of me. They knew there was something different, that I didn't belong there. Most of the prisoners are illiterate, so they would use me to write letters to their lawyers, or, they were pretty nice there. I got a call, "Wiegand, roll up your stuff, you're leaving." I thought, oh, great. I get to go find my kids, I get out of here. I didn't know the worst was yet to come, and to come, and to come. I wear sandals because for the rest of my life, I cannot wear shoes because I have holes in the back of my feet from the shackles that I've been kept in. They put me on an extradition bus. They brought me downstairs at the county jail, and they put chains around my feet, belly chains around my waist, handcuffs around my hands, and they chained my hands to my belly button and my feet to my belly button. And they told me to walk to a bus that was waiting for me outside. Now, most people in my situation have 2 federal marshals come and pick them up, fly them back to where they're wanted, and then they're let out on bail. Instead, I was brought into a bus. If you've ever seen Con Air, the movie, it was an extradition bus. It was the maiden voyage of this bus. I was escorted by a bunch of guards, and they lined us up, and they let us get on, and they put me in a cage. And I said, "When do we get off the bus?" And the guard said, "You don't." And I thought she was kidding. And then I'm in a cage locked up. I'm a non-violent criminal. And I said, "Well, when do you take the chains off?" She said, "We don't." And for 7 days and 7 nights, I sat in a chair in a cage with no underwear, no pants on, just these shackles and chains. I didn't even get unchained to get a drink of water. They would bring a little juice cup in. I had to bend my head to my belly button to drink. One of the guards felt so bad about what they did to me. He went and got baby wipes. They wouldn't even give me toilet paper. I was allowed to use the bathroom on the bus in the middle of the men's cages twice a day at like 5:30 in the morning and about 10 o'clock at night. If I had to go in between, that was just too bad. And he would slip a baby wipe under the chains through the cage, through the little hole in the cage, so I could either wash my face or go to the bathroom. There were 3 other women with me and probably a whole bunch of men. And I would tear the baby wipe up, trying to divide it to as many people as I could. One man had a hernia and hemorrhaged on the bus. The blood was coming out of him all over the floor. They refused to take him to a hospital. He was probably 1 hour away from dying. They finally stopped at a hospital and let him get off and chained him to a bed. He did live. At that point, I said to the guards, "I've had enough of this trip. I want my lawyer. I want to talk to my lawyer. I'm in a cage, holding the cage." I said, "I need my lawyer." They said, "Oh no. You can have no communication with anybody when you're being extradited because they might hijack the bus." I said, "Well, when are we going to get to Connecticut?" Because we had gone from Nevada to New Mexico, back to Nevada, down to Texas by the Mexican border, over to Colorado. And I said, with the extradition law, we have 180 days. We can keep you on this bus. And that's the law today. 180 days you can be like that. Nobody knows until you get into trouble. When I finally got to Connecticut, I hadn't had a shower. I hadn't been free. The newspapers, the photographers were waiting when I got off the bus. They escorted me in chains into the county jail, again, over in Connecticut. They took all kinds of pictures of me. I put them in the paper. Of course I looked terrible. I had just spent 3 weeks of hell and hadn't had a shower. I was as skinny as could be. I was bleeding all over the place. They let me out on bail that day. My family came and bailed me out of jail. My mother said she could not believe the condition my body was in. My mother took pictures of my feet, my arms. I didn't even know my back was completely dark purple, my whole back, because the belly chains were on so tight. They had burst all the veins in my back. And you know what? You don't feel that pain because the pain of your heart is so bad. All I can think about is what is happening to my children. I got out of jail that day. I hired a detective. Nobody knew where my boys were.